Welcome back to my series where I'm ranking every single episode from each Doctor's era. Today we're going to be ranking all of the episodes featuring the fourth Doctor, starring Tom Baker. Now, Tom Baker did 7 seasons, so this is going to take a little while to go through, so I hope you've got time. If not, cancel your plans. We've got episodes to rank. We've got things to do, baby. We're starting off this list with his first story, Robot. Robot feels so out of touch for the fourth Doctor. It doesn't feel like a story for him. It feels like a bit of an overhang of the third Doctor era, but doesn't even really feel like a third Doctor episode. You've still got Sarah Jane, you've got the Brigadier, but the actual giant robot doesn't even feel like a John Pertwee story. It's just really odd. Instantly, Tom Baker is brilliant. I think in these early days, he's really trying. I think his relationship with Sarah Jane is instant and there's a real chemistry between the two. Comparing the story to something like Power of the Daleks and Speared from Space, this just doesn't really have the source that those two post-regeneration stories had. So it's a bit of a rocky start to this new era, but it goes on to show some of the best stories this show has ever made and as the series goes on. Next up, we have The Ark in Space. The Ark in Space is famously Stephen Moffat's favourite classic Doctor Who story, which it always surprises me. I don't think this is a bad story in any sense of the word. In fact, I've rated it as good. I think it's a good story. I think it has good tension and it has one of the Doctor's greatest speeches. And maybe that's why Stephen Moffat likes it. He loves the speech. I think the monsters are a little bit clunky, but I love the bubble wrap. I think that's brilliant. It's a stroke of genius. I love the setting, and I think it's really economical and smart for them to reuse those sets in a later story as well. There's a real sense of there's a somewhat overarching arc in the Ark in Space. You can really feel like Tom Baker is getting a grasp of what he wants his Doctor to be at this point in history, and he does a great job. I feel like already Harry feels like a complete waste of time. Like he doesn't really fulfill a purpose in the show. So it makes sense for him to leave, even though I think Ian Marter does a really good job at giving him a bit of character as well. I do enjoy Harry, but he does feel a bit pointless. Next up, we have the Saran Experiment. It's nice to see a return of the Sontarans, especially after last season, and also having Sarah Jane recognize them and have that connection already adds a real sense of depth to the show. I don't think this appearance is as good as their last one, but I think this just being 2 episodes, it's a solid Doctor Who story. I love the idea of this setting of being in the world after it's been completely wiped out. It's far future, and how it connects to the Ark in Space as well is really interesting. There is a real idea of what this future looks like, and it's got some really great world building with all of these stories coming together. I think the Sontarans are especially cruel in this one with their experiments, and I think they come across as a real good threat. Next up is Genesis of the Daleks, which is no surprise, I put it in the best category. Genesis of the Daleks is one of the best Dalek stories of all time. I don't think that's a really controversial opinion. I think a lot of people would agree with that. After the John Pertwee era, where we had 3 Dalek stories that didn't really reinvent the Daleks or give them anything to really do that was new and exciting, this felt like a return to form. It felt like they had something to say with the Daleks, like how they did in Power of the Daleks and Evil of the Daleks. You know, there's some real forward momentum. We're really seeing the birth of the Daleks. And I think that's interesting for Doctor Who, because now Doctor Who fans are thinking, what is the genesis of the Cybermen? What is the genesis of the Sontarans? You know, we're starting to think about that with the wider world building of Doctor Who in general. And the reason why we're thinking stuff like that is because this story is so good. People are wanting to recreate something this amazing. And introducing the character of Davros completely changes the Daleks throughout the rest of the classic series, to the point where the Daleks can't even turn up without Davros being there. He becomes such an important part of their mythology, which I don't know is the best addition to the Daleks. I think it makes the Daleks come across more of an army in future stories rather than characters within themselves. But in Genesis, Davros plays a really important part. Skaro feels really dangerous, and it feels like at any second that our main characters could die or be gassed to death. You know, it's really grim, this one. And it's really foreshadowing the type of dark stories that Philip Hinchcliffe was really pioneering for the show. And I think it really shows that Terry Nation had more to do. He had more stuff to say with Doctor Who. You know, he wasn't completely burnt out, because there's an argument that he ran out of ideas for the Daleks during the John Pertwee era. But this shows that he had something in him. He had something to say. Even though it does kind of retread the same old stuff of the World War II analogies and, you know, nuclear war and stuff like that. But he does it so well in this that you're willing to overlook that. Because you don't always have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to make a really, really good wheel, you know? Genesis of the Daleks is one of those stories I could watch all the time. It's so good, it's so atmospheric, and if you haven't seen it, this is one you have to see. Next up is Revenge of the Cybermen. Now, Revenge of the Cybermen is not for me. I like elements of it. I enjoy Revenge of the Cybermen from a camp perspective. I think it's funny. I love the Vogons. I love the campy Cybermen, you know, where they've got the hands on their hips. But yeah, a lot of it just misses for me. They just feel like generic robots. They don't really feel like the Cybermen to me. I feel like the Cybermen and converting people has to be a part of their story. It can't just be, oh, we're invading this planet of gold. That's not something that excites me in any way. But I do think Revenge of the Cybermen is an enjoyable watch, but not for the reasons they set out for it to be. Next up, we have Terror of the Zygoons. This story is one of those few stories in Doctor Who that's kind of perfect. It takes a really simple thing of a shapeshifter and just executes it brilliantly. You know, the Zygoons are so brilliantly designed, and even their sets that accompany it, all those oranges and greens are just so beautiful to look at. It's one of those stories that I don't watch that often because I want there to be enough space between it. That when I watch it, it's like, oh, I'm really valuing this. I'm really savoring it. It's not something I'm going to put on all the time, which is silly, I know, which I really should just watch it more. And I have like a really fond memory of that cliffhanger where Sarah Jane's on the phone and the Zygon like taps her shoulder to be like, hey, I think that's so funny. Everyone's like, that's the scariest cliffhanger ever. And I thought it was like the funniest thing I've ever seen. Because he's just like, hi, sorry, I know you're on the phone, but can I have your attention, please? So funny. So funny. I love it. Love Terror of the Zygoons. This is like must watch Doctor Who. And it's surprising it took so long for them to make another appearance because the design's brilliant. So it's great that the new series brought them back. Next up, we have Planet of Evil. Now, this story is rated a lot higher just because the set design is so beautiful. It really feels like you're on a distant world, and the people who worked on it are just incredible. They should be so proud of themselves. It is like landmark best set in Doctor Who's history. I'll put it out there. I think it's one of the best sets in Doctor Who's history. I love the monster and how it's like that weird effect is really cool. It's really dark and grim. And I think it's one of those stories that is a really good watch, even though I don't think it's the best story. Does that make sense? I don't think that makes any sense, but I'm sorry. Next up is Pyramids of Mars. This story is one of those great things where it's all about the vibes. That's why it works. You know, it's the set design, it's the costume design, it's using the ancient Egyptian mythology and blending it all together to make a great Doctor Who story and giving it a Doctor Who twist. I love the mummies. I think they're really cool, and how they crush people to death is so funny. Sutek, you know, Gabriel Wolf has such an incredible voice that anything he says turns into gold. It's obvious why Russell T Davies wanted to bring back Sutek, because he's just so brilliant. Even though I don't fully understand what Sutek's motivation was in the new series, in this, it just works for me. Next up is the Android Invasion. This story is something that I always loved the first half, and then the second half is just like not cemented in my brain whatsoever. I love the setting of this cute little country village. I love the idea of all these people being replaced into androids and stuff like that. I think all that stuff is brilliant. But there's something about the second half, once the villains turn up, I just think they're a bit silly. It feels almost like a Sontaran story, but they didn't bring the Sontarans in. They just brought this new monster that does the same thing. Maybe it would have worked better if it was the Sontarans, but you know, having the Sontarans 3 seasons in a row might be a bit much. I don't know. But yeah, for some reason, second half doesn't stay in my mind, but love the first half. Sarah Jane being replaced by an android is also another amazing moment. There's just so many great moments in it. It's just, the thing as a whole package doesn't really work for me. Next up is The Brain of Morbius. This story is so fun. This is like the epitome of Doctor Who takes an idea from someone else and gives it a Doctor Who twist, but this one barely gives it a Doctor Who twist. It's just Frankenstein. They've just decided to make Frankenstein, but they just said, oh yeah, it's Morbius. He's a Time Lord. So, okay, it's crazy. But I do enjoy the story. It's that great gothicness of it. It's all the spooky set designs, and I think it's a really enjoyable watch. Next up is The Seeds of Doom. This story is perfect. This story has no notes from me. It fills the 6 parts and it's brilliant. Everything in like the Arctic base is tense and creepy. You've got a great villain and he is very charismatic. And I love that type of villain in Doctor Who where there's someone suave, and I love that stuff in Tom Baker's era. You get it in City of Death as well. It's like that vibe is really enjoyable to watch. I love him playing his organ to the plants. I think that's brilliant. I love everything about it. There's like no notes. It's a story I rarely watch as well, for the same reason Terror of the Zygons, and same writer. It's so good that you want to savor it. You want to sit down and watch all of it in one go and really enjoy every single little bit of it. It's excellent. It's peak Doctor Who. And it's sad that the writer didn't write more Doctor Who after this. I'm not sure why that is. I don't know much about this writer and this era as much as other eras. But yeah, I love these 2 stories. They're brilliant. Next up is The Mask of Mandrag. Mandragora? Am I saying? Mandragora Helix. I don't think I'm pronouncing that right. But go with me. I do really like the story. I love the setting. I love the costumes. I love the sets. Tom Baker at this point is really at a flow with his performance. He's got that perfect blend of I'm still trying, but I'm also having fun with it. And which is what I really like about Tom Baker, is because I love of his funny, silly stuff that comes later on, but he does stop to act as much. You know, he starts to become a little bit too silly. Even though I find that enjoyable, it's not the best way of telling Doctor Who, I don't think. I think there has to be a sense of believability to it. Like, you have to take it seriously in order for it to work. Sarah Jane has her best outfit in this one as well. She looks amazing. I love when they go down the helix and all that cool effects. It looks brilliant. It looks so nice. I love the little gay couple in there. I know they're not technically gay, but they're so gay. And I really enjoy their relationship. And I think they've said later on that they played it as if they were romantically interested in each other. So, you know, for me, I'm taking it. They're gay. And I love their dynamic and stuff like that. It's so funny and cute. But yeah, love the story. It's a really good comfort viewing one. This is one of those ones that definitely feels like perfect for a cozy night. Next up, we have The Hand of Fear. This story is really good. It's a really good departure for Sarah Jane. She gets a lot to do and she gets to really be creepy and do lots of different stuff. She also has a really fun costume. I have no idea why she would ever wear that in real life, but it's such a great costume, so who cares? And it has a great quote, "Eldrad must live," is brilliant. I love all the stuff in the nuclear power station. It feels like it has really big production value, and to like film it in a place like that feels really creepy and cool. And when they go to the planet, there's like, I love all the stormy effects and it just looks really nice. And yes, it does feel kind of similar to Pyramids of Mars where they're like trying to like go through these caves and stuff. But there's just something about it that I just love. I think it's one of the better companion departures. And that final scene with Sarah Jane and the Doctor saying goodbye to each other in the TARDIS is really powerful. And I think the two actors actually wrote the scene together, apparently. You can tell that there's a sense of these two people really understanding their characters and giving it that weight that it really deserved. You know, because Sarah Jane deserves a really good departure because she's such a brilliant companion and Liz Sladen is such a brilliant actor. And I think that scene really does it justice. Next up, we have The Deadly Assassin. Now, this is a story people adore, and I can see why. I think Tom Baker does a really good job at holding the show on his own. And the stuff on Gallifrey is really interesting and different, and it has a new perspective on the Time Lords of what we've seen in the past. But my issue with this story is when we're first in the Matrix, I really love it because it's experimental and different and spooky and weird. But as the story goes on, it becomes just two people hunting each other in a quarry. I just don't find it as tense as others do. The thing is, I rated it as good because it is good. Like all of that stuff in that section is good. I just don't find it very captivating for me personally. So when I put it here, I think it deserves to be in this spot, but it's not a story I love to rewatch very often. But I think the first time I watched it, I was like, this is something really special. And I can recognize that this is a good piece of television, whilst also saying it's not really my favorite. Next up, we have The Face of Evil. I am not a huge fan of the story. I love Leela, and I love the setting, and I love the giant Tom Baker face. And it has one of my favorite cliffhangers where the Doctor is like on his knees and like the projections around him are like screaming and it turns into that child's voice. It's like chilling. I literally felt goosebumps the first time like I heard that line. It was just, when it devolves into a child's voice, it was so, even thinking about it now, I get chills. Yeah, there's something about it. It's just brilliant. It's really, really brilliant. But overall, I don't love it. I get what the story's trying to do, but I don't know what it is about it. I don't know if it's the pacing or something, but something about it is just off, and I can't put my finger on it. Next up, we have The Robots of Death. This story is excellent. You know, it's that perfect thing of the Doctor coming in and there's a mystery and he becomes like the Sherlock Holmes. You know, he does that really well, especially Tom Baker, who seems like someone who would be brilliant as Sherlock Holmes. The design of the robots it's just iconic. And it's something that, you know, they clearly were inspired by in Voyage of the Damned. And the red glowing effect in the eyes is really well done, and having that staticky effect is just brilliant. The amount of death is just really dark. And yeah, it's like an Agatha Christie, but Doctor Who, set on a sand miner in the distant future. It's just really, really smart. Next up is The Talons of Chang. I can understand that this story has some really great dialogue in it and it has a really good atmosphere and it looks really, really good. And I love all the costumes and that. But this story to me is just so racist. It's hitting your face that it's like, you can't watch this without acknowledging it. And to ignore it would be a disservice. And then also, I think, racist within itself. I think that you can enjoy something whilst also acknowledging the negative parts of it. And that makes you a complete person. That makes you someone who engages with the media that you watch, instead of someone who is a mindless drone who just sits in front of a television and just does not think. And I think that's a disservice to yourself. So, you know, I think if you love the story, that's fine. But, you know, be critical of the parts that are obviously very problematic. Next up is Horror of Fang Rock. Now, this story is brilliant. When I rewatched it recently with the new special effects in the collection set, it just reminded me how tense and brilliant it is. I think this story has one of Tom Baker's best performances in the entire show. I think he comes across as really terrifying. There's a cliffhanger where he's like looking at the camera and he's like, "We're locked in." And it's scary because the Doctor seems actually terrified. He seems like, this is a problem I can't fix. Because the Doctor usually laughs off a lot of the villains and be like, haha, I'm smarter than you, I can do whatever. But once the Doctor's like, I don't know how to do this, that's when the tension and the stakes get high. And I think this one's really brilliant. Next up, we have The Invisible Enemy. This one is not for me. I am not a huge fan of the tonal change of shifting away from darker storytelling from Doctor Who at this period. It gets a little bit silly for me, and this one to me feels very silly. I love the introduction of K9, even though that is technically very silly. But that becomes with something with a sense of hindsight. When I started watching Doctor Who, I already kind of knew of K9 already, so it wasn't, wow, what a tonal shift. Like I knew it was coming. But ultimately, it's a story I don't enjoy, and it's like I don't watch, so. Next up is Image of the Fendal. This story, in theory, I feel like I should love a lot more. It has all the right elements, and I do enjoy it, but there's something just a bit off for it for me. I love the design of the Fendal. I love the tone. I love the setting. I love all the characters. So yeah, I really do like the story, but there's something that's just missing to get it to those upper echelons of Tom Baker's era. Next up is The Sunmakers. I really enjoy this story. I think it's really funny how much Robert Holmes, the writer, is just so mad about tax. And it's just such a silly idea for a Doctor Who story, but it just works for me. But then again, it's that typical Doctor Who story of the oppressed versus the oppressors. So it doesn't really feel like it's like treading new ground to put it into an upper category. Next up is Underworld. I've put this in the not for me category, and I feel awful about it because that first episode is really quite good. But the problem with the story is that the production is so poor for the final 3 episodes, it becomes distracting. Everything on those green screens is so distracting because it's so badly done that I can't even connect with the script. I'm not even paying attention to the story, and I really, really want to. You know, when I got the collection set, I was like, no, I'm going to sit down and really try and pay attention to what the story they're trying to tell. But I just couldn't. It was just so poorly made that it felt like a Doctor Who fan film. You know, it just felt so wrong that I couldn't pay attention to it. So I feel like when I'm putting Underworld in the not for me category, I feel bad because it's because of the production, not the actual script. Because I have no idea what the actual story is really about. Next up, we have The Invasion of Time. I've put this in the okay category because I feel like it's one of those stories that it's so bad that it's good. It's nice we get a return to Gallifrey. It's nice that some Talons turn up. And then we have the most silliest little glittery monsters of all time. Once again, it's a story let down by its production. And, you know, you've got all the stuff within the halls of the TARDIS, but it's clearly just some hospital. They just haven't got the budget to make this show. And it's really, really rough. But I do admire that they went ahead anyway and tried to tell the stories that they wanted to tell, even though the budget didn't work for it. But I think The Invasion of Time is a really fun story to watch, just because it is so bad that it's good. But it is a really unfortunate departure for Leela. It doesn't really make any sense for her to get married off to this guy that she just met. It doesn't feel like in line with her character whatsoever. Her ending up on Gallifrey, it's odd that we haven't bumped into her again in future Gallifrey stories. I know they haven't expanded media, but I meant on TV. Yeah, I think if this story had a little bit more time, a little bit more money, I think it could have been a lot more of an enjoyable watch. Next up, we've got the Rebos Operation. This story starts the Key to Time saga, and I really, really like the Key to Time saga, but that is because of nostalgia. This was like the first season of classic Doctor Who that I watched in its entirety, so I have a special place for it. I love Mary Tam. She was my first proper Doctor Who companion for the classic series. And, you know, so I have a connection to this era, so I'm a little bit more biased. The actual story itself isn't my favorite of this season, but it has a beautiful location. The sets are amazing. I love all the snow. Mary Tam wears the most incredible outfit ever. I love meeting the White Guardian, all that stuff, and the warm gold light coming into the TARDIS is one of the most beautiful visuals in the classic series. It's clear they had a real good vision of what they wanted this season to be, and they executed it brilliantly. Next up, we have the Pirate Planet. People love this one. This is like people's favorite one, but I've never really resonated with it whatsoever. So I've just put it in the okay category. I feel like I need to give it another go. I think when the collection set comes out, I'm really going to try and rewatch it and try and see what people love about it. I love the villain. I think he's great. I love the little mechanical parrots. He's great. But yeah, there's just something about it that just feels off for me, which is strange because I love Douglas Adams' other scripts in Doctor Who. So in theory, this should be one of the ones I really like. But yeah, I don't know. Next up is The Stones of Blood. Okay, you're going to think I'm crazy for putting this up near the top, but this is one of my favorite Tom Baker stories ever. This is a story that only Doctor Who can do. You've got these giant stones that are menacing. They're glowing and they're moving on their own. They shouldn't be scary, but they are. You know, you've got vampire rocks. You know, it's just, that's Doctor Who. It's where, like, this shouldn't have worked, but it just does. I love the character of Amelia. I think she's incredible. I love the setting of the little village. And that's what Tom Baker's Doctor Who does really well. It does those nice little country villages and it feels really homely. A lot of people stop enjoying the story once it moves to the spaceship, which I understand why, but I still just love it. I love it so much. Next up, we have the Androids of Tara. This is a story that I'm not hugely fond of in the Key to Time saga. This is one of those ones where Doctor Who is borrowing from an established novel already, but I don't feel like this is the one that I would really want Doctor Who to do. Romana wears the most ridiculous outfit of all time, and I can't help but love it. I love the little, like, Taran wood beast, He's really funny and cute. But yeah, it just doesn't work for me. I think it's one of those stories I need to give it another shot at. Next up, we have the Power of Craw. This story, I rewatched it recently actually, because I was really feeling that key to time. This story is just, it has a great setting, but painting a whole bunch of people green is always silly, and the effect of Crawl doesn't really work, but the actual story itself is quite fun. I don't mind the Power of Crawl. I'm a Power of Crawl truther, but yeah, it's not rated the highest on this list, let's just say that. Next up is the Armageddon Factor. This, unfortunately, was a really sad end to this season. It just ended on a whimper. That's the hard thing about these overall story arcs for these seasons. It's the same reason why Flux, I really enjoyed the first 4 episodes, but those final 2 really just let it down. It ended on a whimper. Whereas, I think like something like Trial of a Time Lord ended really well. It's a real risk doing these big story arcs. And unfortunately, this one just didn't end very excitingly. I think the actual final episode, when the Key to Times were put together, all that stuff's fine. I don't dislike it, but the actual story itself is just overly long. It's 6 parts, and I don't really think it has much to say. Next up, we have Destiny of the Daleks. This, I think any Dalek story to follow Genesis of the Daleks is going to struggle. This just feels like a much more generic Dalek story, and they haven't really got too much to do in it. It's beginning the trend of these are Davros stories rather than Dalek stories. And I feel like the performance of Davros isn't that strong compared to the other 2 Davros performances in the classic series. Also, it's a return to Skaro, and it looks absolutely nothing like the sets from Genesis of the Daleks or the original Dalek story, so it just feels odd. The whole thing just feels wrong. Next up, we have City of Death. And this is one of my favourite Doctor Who stories of all time, easily. And easily my favourite Tom Baker story. City of Death, I feel like it's always a great introductory story if you're a new series fan to the classic series. Because if you like Stephen Moffat's writing, Douglas Adams is clearly an inspiration for Stephen. It's all like time paradoxes, lots of weird stuff going on, beautiful location filming in Paris. You've got this really great monster. You've got a very suave villain. It just has all the elements. It's funny. It's got the Mona Lisa. It's that perfect balance of telling a really good story, but good jokes. And everyone looks like they're having a really great time. So yeah, love this story. Next up is Creature from the Pit. And unfortunately, the story is not for me. There's nothing about this story that I really like. The planet setting is fine. And yep, that's all I have to say about Creature from the Pit. Next up is Nightmare of Eden. This story, I admire what it's trying to do, but I don't think it really translates well to screen. I like the idea of doing, stuff like talking about drugs in Doctor Who, which is something that Doctor Who doesn't really do, during this time period especially. But overall, for me, it's a story that just doesn't really work. All right. Next up is the Horns of Nyon. And yes, I know you're going to think I'm crazy because I'm putting this in the good category. I've ranked this higher than so many other brilliant Doctor Who stories, but hear me out. The Horns of Nyon is one of the most rewatchable Doctor Who stories of all time. It is so funny, and it's so silly, and it's so bad that it's good. But the good things in this story, the actual good stuff, is that Romana gets a lot to do because Tom Baker's too busy messing around with the TARDIS, whereas Romana really takes that role of being the Doctor, and she's brilliant in it. Even to the point where she's the one having the final big argument with the lead villain. She is the Doctor in this one, and I love that. Next up is Sharda. I wasn't going to do Sharda because I'm like, is it finished, is it not? But I'm going to go with the animation. I'm going to go with the 6-part animation because I think that's the better version. I really enjoy this story. It's a story that's been done to death. Let's be honest. Let's not exaggerate. It has been done too much. But it is a really good story. It's one of Douglas Adams' greats, and it's sad that it was never finished originally because I think it would have gone down as like one of the best of the best. But I think the 6-part animation does a really good job at telling the story at a better pace than the movie edit. And yeah, I would definitely recommend watching that version on the collection box set. Next up is the Leisure Hive. I've put this in the good category because I think it deserves its place because it's so well directed. It is one of the more uniquely looking episodes of Doctor Who. There's a lot of fun camera movements, And it's one of those stories that once again promises a bold new direction for the show with this brand new redesigned titles, but then completely goes back to being regular old Doctor Who next week. Like none of those interesting camera movements are really done in future stories. This director did this story and then that's it. And I think that's a real shame because Doctor Who never looked so visually interesting. I don't think it's the world's greatest story, but it's told so well that it's enjoyable. And I love the Famasi, I always have a good time with them. So yeah, I think this is a worthwhile story to watch. Next up is Meglos. Unfortunately, Meglos is not really for me. I love the idea of a cactus Tom Baker, that's funny. I could admire that they were experimenting with camera tracking with the green screen, so you can do nice camera movements and the model will follow along. I really admired that, but ultimately, I just don't really love the story. I don't think it really grips me. Next up is Full Circle. As you're starting to see, I'm not a big season 18 fan. I like the setting. I think the location footage looks really good. And that's about it. Next up is State of Decay. This is a story that I really want to love. I really want to love it, like everyone else does. I think it has all the elements of, vampires and stuff like that, but it just isn't creepy enough. It doesn't have a tone to it that other people are seemingly seeing that I'm not. I think also as well, the story is once again let down production because, you've got Tom Baker and Lala Ward who are clearly hating each other at this point, where Tom won't even look at her. And those scenes are so uncomfortable to watch. And it's impossible not to notice it, that there's something really off. It's like, why do these two people hate each other all of a sudden? It's just not a very enjoyable watch. Next up is Warriors Gate. This is another story that's not for me. I understand what Warrior Gate is about, but I don't really care about it. It's not a story that excites me in any way, shape or form. It's just not the type of Doctor Who I enjoy. Next up is the Keeper of Traen. Now, this is such a great story. Not only does it introduce one of my favorite companions, Nyssa, it's got a beautiful set design, beautiful costumes, and it's a really great story. I love the idea of this statue that appears in the garden and it comes alive at night. And, the master slowly being revealed and taking over Nyssa's father's body. It's so grim and gross, but it feels almost romantic because of all of the costuming and stuff like that. There is a really great sense of world building here. And I just love this story so much. And now we're at the end, but the moment has been prepared for. It's Legopolis. I feel like I'm saying it wrong, but I think it's just my Australian accent that's saying it weird. Legopolis. Is that right? I don't know. Either way, love this story. This story is all about vibes. The Watcher in the distance is terrifying. That scene where Adric is on the boat looking up to the Doctor who's on that bridge and you can't tell what he's saying to the Watcher, there's something about that moment that just gives me chills. The idea that the Doctor is talking to death, it's a representation of his death. It's so grim and creepy. And it's just so well done. Tom Baker is so mournful and grim in it, and it just really adds this real sense of atmosphere. Also, it introduced Janet Fielding's Tegan, who I adore as well. And yeah, it's just a story that works in every single way. It's brilliant. Well, that's the Tom Baker's era. I'm surprised how many I've put in just the okay category. That really does surprise me because I don't mind these stories, but I just don't love them. I think it's as well, this is another problem as well, because some of his stories are so good that you can't put them side by side next to the Sunmakers, whereas some of these stories in other eras might be ranked higher. That's the thing about ranking, it's really weird, isn't it? But overall, love Tom Baker's era. I think it's a reason why he's the most definitive Doctor, and it's not just because he was on it for so long, but because he's really good. And his performance, depending on companion and the producer, changes so much. And I think I enjoy all the different types of Tom Bakers that we get over the years. But what do you think? Do you agree with my list or am I completely wrong? I'm expecting I'm completely wrong for this one. I think people are going to be upset because I know people love Tom Baker's era. And I think some of these being in the okay category is just not going to fly. And, it is what it is. So let me know in the comment section below what you think. Next up, we'll be ranking the 5th Doctor era by Peter Davison. Okay. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the official Josh Nair's YouTube channel.